Good. See, you're not taking this comfortable chair.
No, go ahead.
No, maybe you get.
No, I'm gonna go lay down.
Really?
Yeah, I'll see if I can.
All right. Watch out, John, there's that phone right there.
Yeah, let's see. I don't know if it's old age, but it seems to me that life, as I get older, and I don't know if it's older or just the more I live life, whatever, is less surprising than it used to be. It's like, not like I've done this before and been here and done that, but it's more like, there's nothing new.
Well, you also have a very deep understanding of what's going on here, so that you see these things happening, and it's more of the same.
But I'm still surprised that there's nothing new.
That's
It's just like, I can't remember, I heard something on the radio the other day, and they were reviewing some book or something, and they were saying, this is what life gives you, and so on and so on. Well, duh. Like, why are we even talking about this anymore? And yet we are, but there's nothing new under the sun, they say. I'm always quite shocked when I realize that although I've had original thoughts, there's nothing original in my thinking.
Well, everything, what everything is one thing that happens one way. There's infinite different ways it can look.
That's right.
And, if you're being with life more superficially, then you deal with phenomena as on their surface value, let's say, in which case everything is new, everything is surprising, everything is a revelation. But as you have more and more of an understanding of what this is, then all these differences are just more, more. It's like the change of the change of the play of light on water as it ripples or something. It's a different angle of view of the same thing, you might say.
Yeah.
And I think this comes, as a natural intuition to some extent, as people mature, regardless of whether or not they have, spiritual insight proper or not.
But even the discussions that we have around radiant presence, or whatever you call it, are old.
Sure.
I mean, it's like...
Well, there's only one thing we ever talk about.
That's right. But we've been saying the same things for millennia.
For forever.
Forever, yes. And
I mean, we're in a rather peculiar situation. There's only one thing to talk about. You can seem to talk about it in an infinite number of different ways, but it's still, at the end of the day, only one thing to talk about. So to a certain extent, it's going to be same old, same old.
But it's continuously fascinating.
It's endlessly fascinating. I quite agree. It's endlessly fascinating. The infinite nuance.
And it's a continual revelation.
Yes. Yes.
And that's kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Because, once it's been revealed.
Yeah. But the thing is, it's not final. It itself is infinite, literally. It's not a simple thing that there's no bottom to it that you can get to the bottom of. So it endlessly reveals itself with endless newness and endless subtlety of nuance and revelation and so on. But it can never repeat itself because it's literally infinite. But it's still only just the one thing. So it's paradoxical for us.
There is but one thing.
Yeah.
When I was a student, they said, when you write your thesis, you've got to write thesis that nobody's ever written about before. And I said, that's impossible. So I spent 6 months thinking about this. And I went to my professor and said, okay, I'm going to write about shitting. Because I've never found anything about shitting from a psychological standpoint.
The definitive treatise.
And she said, absolutely not. You cannot write about shitting. You will fail your requirements.
Why?
Because it's not an acceptable thing to write about.
That's why no one writes about it.
I said, well, okay, so what should I write about? She said, find something new. So I wrote about biofeedback, but
I'm sure there's
I would
been.
have been much happier writing about shitting because I'd planned the whole thing.
Oh, I'm sure it would have been brilliant.
Pictures and everything?
Pictures and everything.
You can always still do it, so.
I could have still done it. No,
I think you were onto something.
I had.
Well, now it's big. People
Well, no, I was going to have these little questionnaires in bathrooms. box to put in the answers and give them pen and paper. You know.
Oh, that's sociology.
Yeah, I was going to ask some questions, you know, like one piece or three or whatever, you know, there's lots and lots of questions I have in my mind.
Well,
The
there's all the
definitive
cultural
treatise.
They're cultural aspects, but they also, it's something very personal.
Yeah.
We don't talk to anybody about shitting. At least I haven't come across people. And it just seemed, getting back to my original point, was it's really difficult to find original things to study. I mean, there's people who study Chopin's etudes.
What?
This is music.
So what's original in that? You know, maybe you have an original interpretation.
It's so odd though, because it's like the notion of like how this might relate to something else, i.e., you know, is it old or is it original? It's like to then reference back to something that apparently was, and yet there's a sense like that's just, I mean, I could do that and I do that, I play that game, but it's like in a way that's just stands on its own, right, as it is.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I guess from that standpoint, it's completely original, but without a reference point to something, you know, not as opposed to unoriginal. You know, in other words,
Yeah.
it just is, right, without any sort of precedent, literally. So, I mean, it's funny because I sometimes have the sense of like this morning was sort of like a very familiar kind of revelation. I had this feeling of like, I feel as if I've tasted this like countless times, but I have this sense of like very familiar, not new. But then there was a sense of like, I've never actually tasted it like this before somehow. Like it was like there was something about it that was just very distinctive at the same time. Like I feel like I've never seen this before somehow. It's just very, yeah, it's very paradoxical. It's like very familiar and very, very unfamiliar in a sense.
Every instant is the first instant.
Yeah. No, it's like I've never seen this before.
Yeah. But you're looking at it and from an experiential point of view as opposed to the scholarly point of view, which is more interested in you know, going to the library and seeing what's on the shelf and what isn't, which is, you know, a different orientation.
Right. Yeah. That's so wild.
The ordinary human thinking doesn't acknowledge the fact that the only thing there is experience, and experience only happens in real time, and it's completely indeterminate in terms of whether or not there's precedent, whether or not there's time. You know, even though there seems to be memory and there seems to be, you know, arguable phenomena that can be used as you know, basis for arguing that there's a past and there's previous phenomena and that things have happened and so on and so forth. But none of that's actually verifiable, you know, because the instantaneous fact of experience itself stands alone and you can't actually refer to anything outside of it. So, you know, the entire history could be retroactively created every instant. And how could anyone know? But of course, this is radical thinking. You know,
It is radical thinking.
You know, normal consensus reality, human thought doesn't go there. Sci-fi writers and psychotics, I think, and mystics like ourselves.
Doing my research for that, I found out that Salvador Dali wrote a long, very detailed paper on farting. And it was incredible, just absolutely
Have you read it?
Oh, yeah, I've read it several times.
Oh, wonderful.
It's interesting, it's precise, and you can see his mind flowing with this concept.
Yeah. Yeah, he was brilliant.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I wrote to him about having paper on shitting. He never wrote back. I wrote via his publisher.
I read that at one point he had a theory of sort of a perpetual motion machine for eating, that the most highly evolved people would live at the top story of this vast tower, and they would shit, and what their shit would go to the floor below it, and the people living there would eat that, and their shit would go to the floor below it, and the people there would eat that. So basically, everyone was eating each other's excrement. I don't remember the nuance of
Starting to
his
see a
argument.
theme here.
I don't, well,
Basically, you really don't want to work from the bottom up.
well, apparently he argued this, but he was very disappointed when he found out that shit has very little nutritive value.
Go the whole idea.
Yeah, sort of like, been there, done that.
So, trickle down.
I know what you mean, John. I really do. That your attitude about that things aren't surprising, but for me, there's just this kind of odd, unclassifiable kind of contentment or happiness even. I don't know what to say, but something like that. So that something isn't surprising and doesn't seem to matter. That doesn't count for much.
Well, now they're recommending that you try to have many experiences and introduce novelty just to develop different neurons in the brain.
What develops the most neurons in the brain is noticing that every instant is a new experience. That demands paying attention, not just superficially, going through the motions of some different so-called behavior. I think sensitivity is the best stimulation we have for the nervous system. Sensitivity is really precise and intimate awareness of the experiential qualities of the instant, and the absolute dynamism and unprecedented nature of the patterns that appear.
Feels like a shift from being in your mind to paying attention to experience and the ability here above beyond the mind. It's like an actual shift of energy.
You can't be in your mind. It's a fantasy that you're in your mind. It's possible to relate to your experience in terms of interpretations that are occurring mentally.
I thought that was the paradoxical nature of radiant presence, that it can actually fool itself into becoming forgetful of what it is and actually becoming a persona or a being.
Well, it's clearly able to misinterpret itself.
Yes.
Pretty hard not to.
Well, it is. You know, I mean, this is the astounding nature of yoga and of the spiritual inquiry, is that if you think, you know, you start from a mindset, a mindset of consensus reality interpretation, where you think you live in an objective world, you think you live in, you know, with material objects and actual beings and so on and so forth. And so you're approaching your actual experience in terms of all of these patterns and expectations, and you typically will expect your spiritual search to result in new and improved patterns and interpretations. Whereas the nature of radiance is such that it is uninterpretable. It is patternless. And so this requires a fundamental, I mean, this is the great spiritual revelation. And it results in a fundamental paradigm shift as one develops the sensitivity to discover that this is in fact the case.
You say it's patternless?
Well, it's infinitely patterned, but the patterns themselves are infinite, so that they aren't actually patterns. They seem to be patterns, but they have no final nature. It's like the shape of a cloud. You look at a cloud, the less closely you look at it, the more it can seem to have a shape. If you tried to map the actual shape of the cloud, it would be impossible. It's not just too intricate, it's more intricate than intricate, and it doesn't even have boundaries or edge. I mean, the entire thing is impossible. And yet, and all experiential phenomena are exactly like this. The less closely you examine them, the more they seem to be a certain way. But the closer you look, so to speak, the closer you examine it experientially, the more you discover that the nuance and the dynamism and so on that has no coherence. It doesn't have, it's not a pattern. It's patterned, but the patterning is not coherent. It goes out to infinity.
And yet there are patterns of clouds that are identifiable.
Sure.
Cumulus clouds have a pattern.
Sure.
The actual shape is neither here nor there, but there is a pattern
Sure.
that makes that cloud.
The types of clouds, but these are all classifications which exist as abstractions.
That's right.
But each cloud is actually unique,
That's my point.
and no cloud actually fits into any particular classification. Every cloud is in its own unique classification of itself, regardless of the degree to how much it is similar to other clouds in a certain situation, or how much it is different from other clouds in some other situation, and so on. You know, classifying stratus clouds and cumulus clouds and whatever they are. Yeah, I mean they're heavy-handed. They're oversimplifications. All classification is ultimately oversimplification, because if you look at the actual experiential nature of phenomena, which is the only place you can find phenomena, is in experience. If you look at the experiential nature, everything is unique. Nothing has any particular patterning that can be found.
It seems too like the the dynamism, the apparent dynamism of everything makes. I mean, I've just been tripping off on this, like around the entire process of labeling and categorizing and conceptualizing, even what we would call identifying something as that. It's like, so that identification, that labeling, conceptualizing, identifying happens, and then that which has been identified is like gone, and because of its dynamic nature. So
Right.
what the fuck are we actually identifying?
And more
Something that's
fundamentally,
moving.
and more fundamentally, it was never there in the first place.
Right, right, yeah.
But yeah,
Right, no,
but that
absolutely.
too.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's.
It existed as a mental construct.
Yes. Yeah.
But this is a question I have, which is that, so, I mean, I'm just a curiosity, the amazing paradox or whatever of it, of apparition, that how is all of this appearance seemingly recognizable as an apparition, as an appearance of a room and people and, this, when how can I say, well, at the level of dynamism, when it's actually no longer what it was. So how is it has no duration.
Okay.
So how am I able to see anything? How am I able to notice anything?
That question can't be answered.
That's just like, why is the moon up in the sky? It's magic.
Yeah. That question can't be answered.
Right, but it's astonishing because it's like, we, in a sense, I'm not sure I have found anything but apparition in a way.
Yeah, but even that, if you look at what apparition is, apparition itself is a myth.
Correct. Yeah.
So you can't actually find apparition. It's just stranger than strange.
Right.
And if you look at it rationally, like as you set out nicely to do, it doesn't stand up. It's just the whole thing. This is essentially impossible from a rational point of view,
Right.
and yet.
Yeah.
I can't say here it is because what is here and what is and what is it, but here it is.
Right, because you will often say, well, it's actual in the sense of
it is actual.
Present.
That's the amazing thing. It's
right,
actual.
Right, and yeah.
But what it's actual is inconceivable. Right. It's absolutely unresolvable. I mean, to me, as a conceptual, as a concept, this notion of resolvability to me comes closer to hitting it on the head, because it's undeniably actual, but what
is it?
It is actual, and even what actual is you can't find it. You literally can't find it. You can't find, you're left, if you find anything, it's an oversimplification, and you're imagining it. And yet.
But it seems like, emphasis on the seems, I guess, that there's a kind of, I don't know, it's like the presence piece seems like it's got a kind of relentlessness to it, that it's like.
Sure, that's absolute. Presence is absolute. Right.
That it's like, I don't know, we could call it like a kind of a positivity, not in relationship to negativity, but it's just.
Yeah, absolutely. It's on.
Yeah, it just is.
It's on.
It's on. There's no off switch.
But yet, on one level, it's not factual. It's not actually there.
Well, you can't find anything that is actually here.
So you're saying that it's factual, but it's not.
Well,
because to be factual, it has to be identifiable. At least
what I said is actual.
Actual, okay.
So,
you see, I'm not sure that it's actual either.
Well, actual meaning there is real. There is.
There is, yeah.
Okay, that's what I mean by actual. But you can't say what is. And yet it's self-verifying in the case that that presence is. you know. And then when I look at it, when I look at this undeniable fact, if there were any facts, it is this fact of presence. And this fact of presence never shows up naked. It always shows up with a barrage of apparent seemings, you know, which I call this radiance, just to have a way to indicate this fundamental principle, or what seems to be a fundamental principle.
One of the things I was noticing this morning that I was referencing earlier was just what we're talking about now, and one of the things I was struck by is how, I don't know how to describe it. Somehow feeling, if you will, for lack of a better word, this unresolvability, like this ungraspability of this, like that. Yeah, unfindable, just can't pin it down yet, it's present. There's something about that, my sense of that, especially I was just feeling it today very strongly, that is, it's just, it was, I mean, literally like brought me to tears, that there was something so exquisite about that it's a kind of like a fineness that's beyond fine. I don't know, and it's just kind of mind-blowing, really.
Yeah.
You know, that it seems to be, you know, that sort of seems to be almost like a primal quality of it somehow. It's got that kind of intrinsic beauty somehow. I mean, those are just words, but
yeah,
you know, don't capture it, obviously. It has no words to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the joyous things from the point of view of yoga, which you're indicating, is the wonderful fact that as infinitely infinite and infinitely fine, you might say, as this is, it itself, which is perceiving itself, has the capacity to be with that, with an infinite fineness and an infinite sensitivity and infinite subtlety. So, which is way beyond rationality. So it's, you know, it's impossible to reflect on it or you know, poeticize on it or anything. It's, I mean, obviously it's not impossible, but good luck. And yet, it's perceivable. It's knowable in such a primal way.
I was talking to my graduate students about teaching them research methods, and one of the things I explore with them is the quest to measure phenomena in research and science and psychology, which I'm doing, but the impossibility of it, basically.
Yeah.
And so I'm exploring kind of that with them. It's like, you know, this is like the limitations of it as well, which is you can't get at these incredibly subtle things, these human experiences. I said, no, we don't have developed tools to measure these things. I said, well, what's extraordinary is that your experience itself is like the ultimate measurement device.
Right.
Like it has the capacity to know itself in such an intimate way and so directly, like no other measurement tool has. It's like, and that's kind of in a sense what you're describing.
Yeah, exactly.
It knows itself. It feels itself. It tastes itself.
Way beyond anything that can be reported.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing.
And it's totally identifiable and recognizable.
Yeah.
And still is unique.
Yeah.
Which is mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. Yeah.
I went looking in astral planes, looking for something, and it's the same.
Yeah. And wherever you look and experience, no matter how subtle or gross, you find exactly the same thing.
Absolutely.
There's only one thing that happens in one way, you know, which I call radiant presence, regardless of what it seems to be in terms of where you seem to be looking and so on. It's fascinating.
I think there's a danger in identifying radiant presence as something.
Well, of course.
And for a lot of people, it's very difficult not to.
Of course. Yeah, this is why yoga is necessary. You have to see for yourself. And until you do see for yourself, you'll be being with gross inaccuracies.
Yeah.
And there's no way to avoid it. It's inevitable. You know, the only the only way to avoid the pitfall of delusion is to see for yourself what this actually is. And then you'll know for yourself that everything you ever thought of us and everything that can be said about it is wrong. Until then, you may prize certain very subtle, very profound elaborations, but ultimately they miss the mark. Everything misses the mark, but the thing itself, which of course is not even a thing, just and yet it's actual.
I've been I read Facebook quite a lot, and I've got a lot of people from my past who are stuck in their guru worship, whatever it's called. And just recently, over the last 6 months, they've been discussing Murji and Bentinho and all these people who get off on sexual exploitation of their disciples. And the discussion around that is, that's not what it's all about, or doesn't matter, or you just don't understand what they're saying and doing. And it's just really, I find it fascinating, these people who I've shared years and years of experience with.
Sure.
Are polarized around their particular viewpoint.
Sure. Yeah, people are fixated.
Yeah, and it just happens to be right now that this is about sex. I'm sure in the 50s it was about something else. In the 2020s it's going to be 2040s. It's going to be something else. But people just get fixated on. Probably is what's best.
Well, fascination.
But it's the fixation on this is what is wrong, or this is how it works, or this is trying to explain.
Yeah, well, it's it's the error of concretizing something as being a certain way.
When was that error not present?
Well, this is the point. It's always present, but it's possible to see that it is an error.
Oh, an error.
Error.
Oh, I heard error.
Error. Well, error. The error is eternal. The error is eternal, but the error is eternal, but it is in fact an error, and it's discoverable that it is. Sorry, I'll try and enunciate a little bit. I mean, again, it's like I was talking about a little while ago. People who approach spirituality it's inevitable you're going to approach it with the idea that there's something to find. And the truth is obviously much stranger than that. But you can't know that until you see for yourself. If you're told that, then that will be turned into the something that you're supposed to find. I'm supposed to find emptiness. So emptiness all of a sudden becomes this thing that you put on your altar and burn candles to.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, it's almost like the entire starting point is the very error that you're speaking about, in terms of the way that it's framed as I'm an individual.
Yeah. The
on
starting
a path.
Yeah.
Looking for something.
Yeah. The starting point. In Dzogchen, I heard a very nice teaching. The starting point is delusion, and the path is delusion.
Right.
So the path to realization is delusion. And inevitably, what else could it be?
What else could it be?
If it wasn't delusion, then it wouldn't be the path anymore. There would be the realization.
But that is often not pointed out.
Yeah, well,
rarely does it seem to be
rarely is
pointed
it pointed out, and also there are few teachings as subtle as Dzogchen can be in the hands of the right teacher.
Mm-hmm.
This obviously was a wise
Right.
teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But even pointing it out doesn't get you anywhere.
Oh no, absolutely. But it's it's poignant.
Doesn't get you anywhere in terms of having an impact, or doesn't get you anywhere in terms
Of discovering what is.
of.
Well, it's
It
valuable.
might be helpful.
It's
It
valuable.
might be helpful.
It might be helpful for people who are fixating on needing to have a real pure practice. I have to have a pure. No, but your practice is already a mistake. The practice is itself the mistake, and yet you do the practice and enact the mistake in order to discover that fact. And then once you know that fact, then it doesn't matter because it's not a mistake anymore.
So you're saying delusion is ground path and fruition.
Yeah, sure. Realization isn't the end of delusion. It's merely the discovery that delusion, what delusion is. In fact, it's a discovery. You could say that delusion is absolute.
Mhm.
There's no
There's
non-delusion. There's no non-anything.
Comes with.
Yeah, it never. Since it's unresolvable. How can you turn that into some kind of non-delusion? It's like you're lucid in a dream. You see that it's a dream, but you're still dreaming. The dream doesn't go anywhere. You just see it's a dream.
But in a way, that's not delusion. That's not.
Well, in a way, technically, you could say, and yet there's a kind of clarity, but it's a clarity of knowing that there is no clarity.
Well, seeing that is.
Seeing that is a kind of a meta clarity.
Yeah.
The meta clarity of non-clarity.
Which is the beauty of the whole thing.
It's exquisite. It's exquisite.
absolutely the beauty.
It's exquisite.
Who came up with this?
Really.
Oh,
Right. Where else could you go? Really, where else could it lead to?
I'm lost.
That's kind of the point. there ain't no found. The myth of found, the myth of resolution, the myth of the goal, the myth of the result, the myth of the arrival.
what a wonderful world this is.
It's it is amazing. I love the saying in the Gospel of Thomas, or something like, let him seek until he finds. When he finds, he will be disturbed. When he's disturbed, he will be amazed. And when he's amazed, he will reign over everything.
Wow.
I always thought that was such a profoundly succinct revelation of the spiritual path. What's that?
No wonder they
That
didn't
got
work
off.
that out.
Yeah,
I'm sure
right.
that didn't make it into the King James version.
Well, The Catholic Church don't want no yogis floating around. They don't want no competition. Jesus is our man, and you guys just give us your money and shut up. Keep your seats. Keep your pews. Put money in the collection plate. Grovel and suffer, and maybe if you're lucky, you can get into heaven. By the way, we sell some very nice indulgences.
I think this has within itself also a freshness and ability to have newness of discovery. I mean, you say there's nothing new, but there have been incredible discoveries of this that is unknown, but still, I mean, just like discovery of electricity or I mean, it was always there, but
Sure, there's endless discovery, and yet it is exactly itself changes. It's paradoxical. It's one thing that happens one way beyond space and time, and yet it endlessly and infinitely unfolds itself in eternal newness. Very peculiar. But at the end of the day, you can't find anything. You can't actually find newness. You can't actually find sameness. You can't find anything. It's absolutely mysterious. Absolute mystery.
And it's actually a mistake to look.
Well, yeah. It's a mistake. It's a mistake. It's a mistake to expect to find. Certainly. And maybe looking is inevitable.
Trying to find
Seems to be everything. And cancels everything else. I mean, I can't even find something like that very well. Doesn't mean anything. It seems just fine.
Is it saying to seek and find and not to live?
Hail Caesar.
It is interesting that we still do seek. Everybody seems to have an intrinsic need to seek, regardless of their culture and their time, whether it was 2,000 years ago or present, whether in China or in India or in South America, it doesn't matter. There's an inherent seekiness.
I think there's an inherent quality that's like curiosity. This, it feels to me like this is very intensely curious about itself.
Mhm.
You know, it's intensely engaged, unceasingly engaged with itself in a mood of something like exploration. You know, it feels like that.
But once you realize what it is that this is,
Right.
then the desire goes away.
Well, the desire as an
It's
individual,
satisfied.
an individuated desire of like me seeking goes away, but the seeking itself doesn't go away because this is the fundamental curiosity of this about itself, which you know we could call the flow of time. You know, this is continual, you know, unstoppable engagement with the nearness of the instant. You know, I discovered that all the principles that we think of as this personalized principle, like you know, seeking or desire or all these sorts of things are not actually personally based. They're actually the intrinsic nature of this with itself. Desire is another expression of this is intense, you know, experiential engagement with itself. This, you know, it's as if this absolutely, you know, is intoxicated with itself and ever seeks more and more intoxication. Yeah. Something like that. I mean, you know, obviously you can't say what it is or pin down what's happening, but it's as if that was the case. So again, when one sees what this is, desire doesn't cease, it's just seen to be impersonal. Just like curiosity doesn't cease, but it's seen to be impersonal. And it seemed that it never was personal in the first place. The personalizing is all a result of concretizing oneself as a person, which of course was never the case.
It's interesting to hear you describe it that way. Very, very resonant for me. That's kind of experience it as a sort of unquenchable in a certain way, kind of exploratory. I don't know. It's like obsessive almost.
Sure.
And this morning it had this flavor of the word that I was going to use to describe it earlier was like a kind of a feeling of. I'll use the word devotion, for lack of a better word, but it rose up in a kind of a sense of like, I don't know, it just wanted to even be more, like somehow more enraptured with itself and obsessed with, I don't know, I'm not saying this very clearly, but I don't know. It was that kind of like, Jesus, like, interesting. Just like, I don't know. It was like it almost in a kind of a lustful way. It's like,
Yeah.
Kind of drunk on its own.
Yeah. Well, the
magnificence.
the intensity of the engagement of this with itself is limitless.
Yeah.
You know, and it can seem to have all different sorts of flavors. But again, like as with all seemings, if you try to look and see what they actually are, you can't pin it down.
Right. Right. Exactly.
But the energy itself is there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Remember what you click to switch next to you, one click. Thank you.
How about the one behind you?
Huh?
How about the one behind you?
Oh, to wash out the video.
Okay.
I don't want to wash out just a more little video with John's, the sole report of John's shit thesis. It never saw the light of day. I mean, historians are going to be pouring through this video and saying, oh my God, did you hear that? We've never heard a reference to that anywhere else.
Yes.
Oh, that ocean guy.
Is this all right, or do you prefer that without the lower line? Any votes?
I like this.
Okay. The way it was before I asked everybody to click it.
Love the lights. It reflects.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? Yeah, I'm looking over here, and it's really quite a spectacle.
But this glass is old. And
Yeah, the rippling glass.
It's just.
Yeah. Let me take a 10-minute break.
I'd be great to have everybody ate cheesecake.
I'm headed right there.
There's no sugar in
Non-sugar. Non-sugar.
Monk
Oh,
food.
Wow.
The gas part has egg in it, right? I can eat
It
the,
does have egg in it.
I can eat the non-crust part. Are you gluten free? I'm egg free. Egg free.
You shouldn't eat any of it then.
Oh, yeah.
Is there egg in the cheese thing?
Yes. There isn't in the crust. There is
Okay. Oh, there's not in the crust, but there is on
on
the
the crust.
Crust, which is chocolate.
Crust, which is, yeah, I mean, I made it chocolate, it's crackers.
That was a great cartoon, and the couple sitting at the table, and the waitress is at the table, and the guy says, well, I'm gluten-free, I'm dairy-free, I'm, sugar-free, what, can you suggest anything? And the waitress says, a taxi.
The egg part is annoying these days.
What's that?
The egg part is annoying these days.
Yeah, because you like eggs.
No, because I like things that have eggs
Oh, they
in
have
them.
eggs in them.
No, I'm giving up eggs is like, why would anybody even bother being upset about giving up this plain old eggs?
Uh-huh. And why are you giving it up for?
My guru asked us to not do eggs, so.
What was the reason for that?
You kind of Hindu vegetarianish kind of thing going on, like,
Oh, I see, from a kind of farm standpoint.
yeah, probably.
Uh-huh.
Our community around Osho had no eggs because he didn't like the smell of eggs. So we did everything except eggs, but no meat, of course.
How long were you involved with that teaching?
Years,
Wow.
something like that.
In India? Was all of it?
Yeah, no eggs though.
So you got your experience of gurus in this life.
Oh, yes.
More than.
More than I bargained for. There was no bargain, but more than I thought.
Hmm.
Hey, how are you? Oh, thank you.
Mahesh, where were you? I saw you were somewhere warm, but I
Santa Barbara and Cambria.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes,
Yeah, we saw Hearst Castle and.
Oh, what fun. Yeah, we went down to Palm Springs.
That's right, yeah.
About the same time, I think.
It was nice.
Yeah, that's right.
We did a big blowout, 50th and 60th birthdays for each other.
Oh, what fun.
I don't have to do that again for another 10 years.
Really, do yourself a favor.
I just did two long hypnosis sessions just before I came here. So
Would you like Chris Castle?
I love Hearst Castle.
I really liked her castle too. I love it. It's so
My
nuts.
sister went there and she said, oh, it's just fake. Everything about it is fake. And I said, oh my God.
Well, that's the
They
fun.
cried over it.
That's the fun of it, it's just made into folly.
Yeah.
Entire thing's a
I
folly.
liked it so much better than Versailles, which kind of freaked me out. So it's like, and I was expecting something I was expecting to hate it, so it was so much nicer than that. And weird too, because we've got all these things, all this exquisite, like, Greek pottery, 140, 150. You can't go anywhere near it. But,
When I saw it, it was many years ago now, probably maybe 20 years ago. It was kind of somewhat run down. Has it been fixed up now?
A lot, well, I mean, it's run down and fixed up kind of in this, I mean, it's like they're keeping the original everything, so you're not allowed to fix things, that's part of the deal.
Can't, like, make something that's broken.
Well, and maybe, so, if it was originally fixed, and they can, it broke, then they can fix it, but like, there are parts that are unfinished, so they're not allowed to touch it, because it won't be the William Randolph first vision. So the,
Or it's really American
yeah,
vision.
they're, both of their visions. His mother discovered Julian Morgan
Oh, yeah?
as a student, because I asked about that, I said, how did they meet? It's so weird that she was, you know, of course, the second female architect in America, and the first to go through the école, whatever it is. And she did it in 3 years instead of 6 years like everybody else, because she was old, she was 27. He was going to finish by the time he was 30, and all up with the support of his mother, and that's how he had known her through that.
They have various, trips that we go through. So you can only see certain sections.
Right, we just do them. Our bus driver, I wish I almost got his autograph and stuff, was a guy named Jim Strickland, who used to be a relief pitcher for the Minnesota Twins, and I remember I had his baseball card.
No, really?
Yeah.
Too much.
Who's driving the bus?
Yeah, it's the Hearst Castle.
That'll make him to me.
Yeah, you know, I mean, they didn't treat baseball players very well back in the 60s. It was before the big.
Or ticket prices stuff.
Well, also before the union, you know, created the deal with it, for the collusion with ended.
I was gonna say that. Sometimes you use a actual. Cash, nice to see you. Nice to see you. How you been? Good.
Are you going out for the vacation? Road trip?
I'm in this odd place because, you know, I'm just sort of getting used to being in that house, you know, by myself. You know, I kind of like that a lot, you know, so there's some days that I'm going to leave the house. You know? So right now I don't have this urge to go anywhere. But then as spring approaches, you know, I'm starting to get
The
trickles.
sun comes out.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty gloomy there for a long time. You know, nice gloomy, you know, I like the rain and it was great. But, you know, it's finally I want to get out and go see the world.
And then, yeah. Yeah.
Except for shit.
It's kind of weird to be at your house alone.
Yeah, well, it's not weird exactly. I kind of like it. I mean, I like it a lot actually. But it's just, I'm not used to it. And
That's new, yeah.
that's, but there's something about being there. I mean, like I was trying to say earlier, there's just something about life these days that is just like, everything is just kind of, like,
Nice.
odd, but, cool.
Arbitrary sounds like life for me.
Yeah.
Do you get to stay there?
Well, yes, I haven't quite worked it out. And I probably can, because during the time I was taking care of Mom, I was receiving my Social Security, but I wasn't spending it. So it was stacking up, So there's, enough in a bank to make like a serious payment to my sister. See, everything is supposed to go to her. It's a long family story, but my brother and I got ours long ago, and whatever.
Oh, okay.
And so everything that was left was to go to my sister, which is fine with me. So I have to work out something with her. The house actually goes to her really well. But I think I can. She's been very generous about it, and I think I can work something out if I want to stay. But right now I'm kind of wondering, well, maybe now's the time to just get out and go. So, even like I was thinking about getting my RV or traveling. Then I thought, why not just visit Spain or something, I mean, there's nothing stopping you.
Yeah.
And so, thoughts like that have been kind of tickling around. So I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds great.
That's it. I don't know. I mean, up until maybe this week, I haven't felt inspired because the world has felt rainy.
Yeah.
Kind of dark and rainy. So it's fine to just hunker down. But now, maybe. So we'll see. So letting it flow and seeing what happens. Time.
Love that painting. It's very cool.
And that's true, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just fabulous.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece.
I like that one behind you too.
Yeah, I like that one a whole lot. Yeah, Andrew did that. That's from Andrew.
Who is that one?
A woman named, her name just slipped out of my head.
But not here, family.
No. I've tried to find out more about her, but I haven't been able to find out much.
I used to know her name.
Yeah, well, I ordinarily do, but having a senior moment at the second you asked me. That's it's just a masterpiece. Her art, all of her paintings just blow me away completely. I have one other painting of hers. It's sort of a yantra with lots of flames and stuff. It used to hang over here. You've probably seen it, although you may not recall it. That my daughter has now.
I'm amazed at that picture of your granddaughter.
Oh, yeah.
And
I
She's
know,
beautiful.
I felt the same way when I saw that. I thought, wow, just go growing up.
Yeah, she's very precocious. Anyway, by the power vested in me, I reconvene these proceedings.
thank you.
You have a lot of power.
Well, there's not much in the way of proceedings, so it doesn't take a whole lot of power necessarily.
Non-path, getting nowhere. There does seem to be a poignant aspect to it with the discovery of self as not being separate, but as this being itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well put. I mean, it's such a monumental discovery when one makes it, that because what one has always felt oneself to be is actual, but it's actually not personal. It's not separate from anything. It's actually one with everything. And to him to see this, that it is what it has always been, but is not what you thought it was, that it has this absolutely profound internal nature with reality itself, it's mind-blowing. It's poignant to say the least, yeah. Yeah. So one of the biggest surprises in realization, or in let's say advanced spiritual progress, is the discovery that you don't lose anything. Everything is just what it always was. It never was anything else, but it never was what you thought it was. And what it actually is this astounding transcendental condition. This inconceivable, amazing, beautiful lusciousness. That feels like me in my life doing the stuff that I do, muddling through, and so on and so forth. Which is very peculiar. Because of course the naive fantasy for the spiritual aspirant is, I'm going to leave all this coarseness and ascend to some exquisite transcendental bliss state where I'm free of self-hurt and free of the difficulties of life and all this sort of thing.
What do you mean? That's not true?
Well, it kind of is, but not in the way you expect. It is, but you kind of have to take it with you.
It's transmutation, right?
Yeah, it's less transmutation than self-transmutation because nothing actually changes,
Yeah.
and yet it seems to change when you see what it actually has been all along. It's it's recognition.
There's an inherent dichotomy for me, in as much as this is not me,
Right.
but everything I see, know, experience, or think about comes from me. Doesn't come from anywhere else.
Right.
And yet, I don't exist.
Right.
So there's this sort of like
Yeah, it's very paradoxical.
very paradoxical, and it's the beauty of the whole situation is that it is both one thing and it's another thing, and they're not the same, and yet there's only one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a doozy.
It's a doozy. Good one, I like that.
That's technical yoga term. It's a doozy.
That must be a subject.
Yeah. It's actually Sanskrit.
Sounds good.
The Tibetans translated it into Dzogchen.
It seems to me it's only a paradox when you're trying to figure it out. Most of the time, you can just have
Yeah.
however
Yeah,
it flows
well,
out.
yeah, in itself, it's just open-ended. It becomes a paradox when you try to say anything about it, because then you end up spouting contradictory gibberish, all of which is true and none of which is true. The thing itself is just, it's just is what it is. And I think that's one of the most startling things about spirituality is how different what one discovers from what one expected to discover when one is starting out or aspiring to it. The indescribability of realization.
And yet you can get there from anywhere.
Of course. Because it's never not here.
There's nowhere there's not.
Yeah.
But I looked at my guru and his Indian background. He was a Jain and he was brought up as a whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's Ramdas, who was a Harvard professor.
Yeah.
And then there's Adidar, and there's all these different people with no similarities.
Yeah.
But they all discovered this.
Sure. Yeah.
It's remarkable because I look at me and I think, well, I discovered this because of who I am based upon my culture.
Sure. Of course.
And yet every culture gets to this.
Of course.
Whether you're an Aborigine or you're a lost tribe in the Amazon or you live in a high-rise in Chicago.
Yes, sure.
It's all
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the discovery of this light.
Light, L-I-T-E.
This light.
What are you saying?
It isn't some sort of partial discovery of it.
I mean, it's like, there's a lot of teachers and teaching that, point to it, but, doesn't seem as well or, hard to know. I mean, you can't talk about it.
Well, you can talk about it all you want, you just can't say it accurately. I think a lot of spiritual teaching is too ambitious. You know, they want to make it easy. But the problem is, it's not amenable to being simplified. As soon as you simplify it, you create something else that's not really it. You know, it itself encompasses that it's intrinsically paradoxical and elusive nature, and you can only access that by the thing itself. You can't access that by some simplified version of it. Simplified version of it will always end up being just a nice fantasy that is not it. I mean, it is it, of course, ultimately, but it's liable to be a confused, pretense.
Well, I've heard you describe some people as not having a full understanding of it. I forget.
Well, they may or may not have a full understanding, but a lot of them don't seem to have a clear conveyance of it, or an efficient conveyance of it. Which is not surprising because it's impossible to convey.
But I mean, but the basic understanding is identity of separateness.
Yeah.
Both and.
Well, I mean, it's another big factor in spirituality. There's no accreditation. There's no board of, there's no board of accreditations qualifying you whether you're proud or not. So anyone can set themselves up as a, as a spiritual teacher, and all they have to do is find people who will accept them as that, and they're off and running. Regardless of the quality of what they're presenting.
There's this Catholic priest who just got prosecuted, I don't think, sometime last year or so, who was one of the spiritual masters in the Vatican.
Yeah.
And his defense was, it was simple penetration. They didn't have to participate, so let me off. And this is a spiritual teacher who, I mean, it just seems incomprehensible.
Yeah, he's a spiritual teacher, but he's a crappy lawyer.
I don't think he ever claimed to be a lawyer. They didn't let him off either.
Well, a spiritual teacher in the Vatican is liable to be just a reinforcer of dogma. So
Yes. And yet, there's some incredibly profound Christian
of course,
mystics.
of course. But again, it's down to the individual.
Yeah.
notice that, you don't really emphasize that or talk about that, understanding.
Talk about what?
The recognition of separateness. The shift from seeing the identity of separateness as being this.
Well, it's not particularly relevant because it's just a particular instance of a more fundamental discovery, which is the discovery of the arbitrariness of interpretation. You know, so interpreting oneself as a separate self, even though it's huge in terms of the obsession, the obsessiveness that usually goes along with that experientially, it's still in itself not any different than interpreting that as being a table. You know, so the great discovery is the arbitrariness of interpretation, that you can't tell what anything is. And in that discovery, that then self is out the window, but so is the world, and so is space, so is time, so is causality. Everything's out the window.
In my experience of the spiritual teachings that I've observed and been involved with, that distinction you just made is, I almost never hear it, actually.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of discussion of inquiry into the self, but not a lot of like looking at all the other things we're taking for granted as being what we imagine them to be, and that's my sense of it.
Yeah. Well, I you know, I'm very critical of most spiritual establishment teachings as being oriented towards the individual, because the individual is not a viable entity. So, in other words, you know, if I'm presenting to you what for you should do about yourself, the whole basic starting premise is already really misleading, as opposed to just, well, what is this?
Right.
And if you look at what is this, then you take care of it, you get taken care of, but this, taking care of this is absolutely across the board powerful, radical, whereas you may take care of yourself, but still have all sorts of other subtle misinterpretations that may not be being explicitly addressed.
Yeah.
And again, the issue of the self is not, even though it looms very large because of people's self-identification and sense of self-importance and narcissism and so on and so forth, even though it looms large psychologically, it's not really a special instance. It really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, the discovery of actuality answers all questions, and one of which is the issue of me.
The one of only an infinite number of.
Yeah. And the problem, a practical problem of approaching it from the point of view of the individuality, is that there's already usually so much self-obsession and narcissism and self-importance about the individuality that approaching it in terms of the individuality is liable to be just sort of feeding into that subliminally. So it's still about me. It's still about, you know, my importance and I really matter, and whether I realize or not really matters, which is it's liable to be more entrapping, more of a little bit more of a vicious circle, as opposed to, you know, what is that Kleenex box, which doesn't have all the associated narcissism and self-importance, the psychological stuff, and yet the discovery you make there addresses the self totally, with it, you know, with the advantage that is free of all of that psychological self-importance and entanglement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And spirituality is often sort of jumbled up with psychology to a loose or implicit way. And again, I think that's the same mistake. It's really irrelevant and unimportant.
Otherwise, what so often brings people, speaking of seeking, to a kind of an inquiry is some sense of psychological
Oh, absolutely.
unrest and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And that's great.
Yeah.
That's fine, but I don't think that's a dangerous way to proceed.
I agree.
You think it is a dangerous way?
Well, it's not dangerous. It's liable to be more challenging, simply because of the self-importance and narcissism where people tend to generally have. If you're sitting there working with yourself, then all of that stuff is fired up unconsciously and subliminally.
Well, yeah. And as I'll say, I'll let people to come to it more in a kind of a spirit of curiosity, to explore the nature of their experiences that they're finding themselves overwhelmed by or bothered by. But if they come to it from the place of this has to be fixed or resolved, and they're immediately in the entire game structure of believing that it is what they believe it is, therefore it needs to be fixed, and that's delusion.
Yeah.
There's not something there to be fixed.
Mind you, addressing psychological issues on a psychological plane may be very useful, but I think it's a mistake to confuse that with spirituality. I mean, simply because it makes the spirituality harder. Spirituality is really so easy. It's so simple. It's hard because of how simple it is. It's hard. I think it's hard for anyone to believe how it couldn't just be this. It couldn't be this simple, and it is. But psychology is not simple. Psychology is complex, and so that's fine. And there's psychological techniques for working with that, and so on and so forth. As best I can, which is all very well and good. If that's helpful for the individual.
I think they're intertwined. I think if you believe what you think, in psychology and the kind of hypnosis work and stuff like that, it's always about beginning to be able to unsee what you've always seen.
Right.
And so once you have more flexibility in that realm, it transfers over to the more spiritual side of seeing this as it is.
Yeah, if you're working with hypnosis or something where you are specifically unseeing what you see, then that can be very efficient, I think.
Yeah.
In my experience, in my life, I did a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of psychological work. But it didn't affect my spirituality at all. I mean, my spiritual discovery and my spiritual engagement really had nothing to do with that. It was more just about sorting out the entanglements of my personality, which was seducing me into ways of behaving that I wasn't enjoying.
Can I ask you a question on that, Peter?
Sure.
Because it's just an ongoing, I guess, question for me, curiosity that when one sees into the nature, the unresolvable nature of all moments, all experiences, all states, how does that not translate then into a kind of natural, I don't know, resolution of or of this whole psychological dimension in a sense, that
In my In my experience, that's not necessarily the case. There's
Yeah.
a kind of
Yeah.
there's definitely a discovery of the unimportance of that relative to what one thought beforehand. In other words, the unimportance of the psychological states, but that they don't necessarily resolve on their own.
Well, I don't mean that, let's say they go away per se.
Right.
So, but if let's say something like anxiety, somebody has struggled with anxiety, one recognizes the more fundamental primal nature of what that thing is that we're calling anxiety.
Right.
Isn't that the ultimate medicine? Not in the sense of necessarily making it go away per se, but in terms of it's liberating, right? To then one is less subject to that in terms of how it then drives behavior.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only speak from my own experience on that.
Yeah.
And in my case, like I say, I had a very deep understanding.
Yeah.
But I found myself behaving which had nothing to do with my understanding, but just on a human level, let's say, or in a human context, I found myself behaving in ways sort of compulsively that I wished to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I was spontaneously sort of driven to behave in these various ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did psychological work in an attempt to address that, which was quite effective to a large extent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
just as
because I only have my experience to draw on.
I just since I kind of straddle both those worlds, and it's very
Well, for you, it's really
interested in.
Yeah, you would be.
In it, and also, because I think you're right. It seems like it often doesn't necessarily translate.
I mean, I think look at examples in life. You can see a lot of people that clearly have a deep realization, who are really, screwed up, to use a non-technical psychological description.
Maybe that's the DMV. What is it? That's not the DMV. What is it?
Oh, the DSM. Yeah.
DSM. I thought it was the DMV.
Yeah, might as well be the DMV.
Talking about that book.
Yeah.
Well, that's the implicitness too. Psychology is part of the whole.
Well, of course it is.
Everything is included. Psychology,
Sure.
Psychotherapy
Yeah.
is included.
Sure.
Sports and it's all.
Sure.
It's all included, and it's all this intelligence. It's doing all these different things. So
Yeah.
it does. Nothing needs to be transcended.
Right. Exactly. It's like health, for example. You can be realized, but still change your nutrition to improve the way your body feels or functions, seemingly.
Right. Absolutely.
Even as you don't need to,
Right.
and you may not even care whether or not you do.
Sure.
But if you find caring arising, you're free to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I can see where it can help to be in the process of psychology therapy and to see reality.
Oh, absolutely.
You would feel held. You continue the psychology, but you could see how it's perfect. What you're doing is exactly perfect. To going to your therapist and it's all the perfection.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it can be helpful because by removing perhaps some degree of internal resistances or whatever to therapy. I don't know. I'm speculating, but yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, where the two come together for me most profoundly is that I think a huge part of psychology, you kind of speak with this Nash, but that it's kind of coming to see experience much more multi-perspectively in a sense.
Yeah.
That capacity to recognize how many, infinite perspectives rather than being locked into particular ways of orienting.
And
that's the hallmark of realization. So then that's where they really come together.
Yeah. My experience psychologically is that, psychological health is about discovering that one is not integral, that one contains all sorts of these energies that don't necessarily fit together well, but coping with that, rather than seeing that as a problem or playing favorites or identifying with partialities and so on and so forth, which I see as, relatively unhealthy. And just speaking experientially from my own experience. And realization is parallel to that, in the sense, as you say, of the revelation of the arbitrariness of the existence of infinite multiple perspectives, from each of which everything looks different, and yet they coexist. When I was more psychologically conflicted, I thought I was a certain way. And as I became more and more what feels like psychologically healthy, I discovered that I'm all sorts of different ways. And I'm not, and there's no one way that I am. There are just all of these different energies that are there, all of which are me, but none of which are definitively me. So it's a kind of a relaxation of being locked into being a certain way, and then with self-loathing or whatever associated with the judgment of that I am that way, as opposed to, well, that's in me, sure, but this is also in me, and this is also in me, and this is also in me, and
Which
isn't it
sounds
weird?
also a lot like realization.
Yeah, well, exactly. They're parallel. They're definitely parallel, at least in terms of the structurality of it.
I contain multitudes without witness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if I would say the difference for me is psychology is oriented towards the individual perspective, whereas realization is an impersonal perspective. Now, mind you, the individual perspective doesn't actually exist autonomously, and yet it can be assembled, so to speak.
Indeed.
They can seem,
together
yeah.
quite easily.
Well, you don't worry about those contradictions.
Yeah.
They aren't painful.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's not even really that common.
You made that point before that I've been thinking about how there's so many energies that are going on that the personal is such a really small part of.
Yeah.
There's many energies that don't have anything to do with what I think I might be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Such and kind of see that, you can't, I can't, I've spent so much time on my person.
Yeah, sure, who hasn't?
It's a good point, There's so much happening here in infinity of energies that just are strange.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the energy is the best part.
No energy.
The energy is dynamic, it's moving, it's what creates momentum.
Energy is contrasted with what?
You can't, no energy, nothing.
You're a fan of radiance instead of presence. So you radiance instead of presence. So you're a left winger. The presence fans are all right wingers.
The package deal. She was shocked.
Yeah.
Seemed to come together somehow.
Yeah.
It was funny, I was talking to my friend, a friend of mine about his beliefs and stuff like that, and at the end of the conversation, I just, again, before I hung up, I said, look, it's meta, okay, everything's, it's a meta situation.
Yeah. That's a way to put it.
I don't mean meta in the
Right,
Buddhist sense.
right. One more.
Does realization necessarily infer an understanding of the true orientation of the individual?
The word understanding is a little iffy, but yes.
Say the question again, so I understand the answer.
Does realization convey the true situation or orientation of the individual? And to be more specific, one discovers that all orientation is arbitrary. So then the individual is to any degree whatsoever is an artifact of perspective, of which there's infinite perspectives, many or perhaps most of which don't include the individual. So it's like discovering that there's 78 cards in the deck and 4 of them are really focused on individuality, and so that's there. But then there's all these others that are also not that. So it's not that there's individuality and then non-individuality and they're in some relationship. It's more like seeing it as individuality is kind of a relatively arbitrary perspective, or let's say group of perspectives, and seeing it in other terms is likewise other perspectives, and all the perspectives are arbitrary, and there's no hierarchy of any perspective being any truer than any other perspective. So it's perfectly easy to see experience in terms of conventional reality of I'm here and I'm Peter Brown and I'm in this material, blah blah blah. But that's only one perspective, and there's an infinity of other perspectives that are equally true, equally real, equally available right here, right now. And there's no hierarchy. I mean, the real revelation is there's no hierarchy. In delusion, the tendency is probably to think that, my perspective, the materialist perspective of the waking world, that predominance is that it's the real perspective, and everything else is just, daydreams and mental phenomena and fantasies. But you see, in realization, there's a discovery that no, that's not the case. There is no perspective is realer or truer than any other perspective. And most perspectives don't include the waking world.
Okay, I'm a bit hung up. I'm experiencing things in 3 different levels, where there's the person that's in the world,
Uh-huh.
and then there's the sort of meta individual that's like a beam of light that
Sure.
goes off infinitely,
Uh-huh.
where there's the sense of that being an individual,
Right.
and then the third level in which all of that is seen as arbitrary.
Yeah, I can see that. But again, that's three groupings of an infinity of perspectives. And so any given perspective will tend to fall more predominantly into one of those groupings or other of those groupings. But again, there's an arbitrariness to it. And it's not like those three actually exist with respect to each other, because that itself is just another perspective.
Mhm.
But that is a broad, categorization of perspectives that in fact resonates in many traditions. In higher Buddhism, they have the three kayas, which is basically, exactly what you're talking about, for example.
Hmm.
And then, in some of the, magical traditions is also similar, and so on and so forth. But again, these are not things that are actually that way juxtaposed to each other so much as ways in which the possible perspectives tend to, ranges within which the possible perspectives can seem to fall.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And again, there's no, the real discovery is there's no hierarchy in those perspectives. And you don't actually have to, even though the perspectives coexist, since they're really all absolutely arbitrary, you don't have to have any of them.
Just thinking about when we're talking about psychology, it seems that on the second level, the more that one can, for lack of a better term, integrate or import a true orientation,
Uh-huh.
comes the resolution of
Sure,
what we're
Sure.
psychology.
sure, very much so. But again, it's really a matter of perspectives. Psychological difficulties, I think, could be said to be being locked into partial perspectives that and feeling stuck in them. And psychological health, it can be to some degree the discovery of a broader range of or the arbitrariness of these perspectives, so one discovers the one isn't actually locked in them. But I mean, it's basically just sort of the same thing. It's another way of putting the same thing, yeah.
It's so interesting though, because the notion of being locked into a perspective, all the things these traditions talk about, rising above and transcending like identifications, that those things are themselves not resolvable as being that.
Right.
So it's like they don't actually exist in that way.
Right.
So this is a curious thing, right? So you're supposedly extricating yourself from something that isn't the thing to be extricated from.
Right.
Literally.
But that's the partialized argument of so many traditions, where you're basically trying to upgrade your perspective to get a better perspective, as opposed to the discovery that all perspectives are arbitrary. So then you're free of all perspectives; none of them are true.
Right.
Which is what full-on liberation looks like. You become free of the perspective not by extricating yourself or purifying yourself from it, but by seeing it itself isn't it. It isn't what you thought it was, and you're not in it, and it's arbitrary, and
Yeah.
But so much of spirituality is couched in this kind of upgrade mentality. I have old software. I want to get the 2.0 version. There'll be an improvement, and then I'll be happy, or then I'll feel free, or then I'll.
But it's so interesting. Like you introduce a thing called noticing. You don't really emphasize it that much. It is around you, but it's part of you talk about, and then I will sometimes hear people engage with that as the notion. It's just almost
Right.
seems impossible to not take that on board as in contrast to not noticing.
Right.
But right away, you're often running in delusion,
Right.
in a sense,
Yeah.
because all there is noticing.
Yeah.
Or noticing doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah, to really understand noticing, you have to understand noticing is noticing what is already being noticed. Noticing is noticing the noticing of noticing.
Right. but
That's the fine print.
right. Right. You said jump into the back of the book. But yeah, it's just how to introduce those kinds of things in such a way that they're not immediately reified into being like something.
Yeah.
Dichotomized from the absence of it, because then
the only way to do that is
I'm not noticing again.
The only way to do that is to point out that anything you can say is not true.
Right.
And to really try to have that be recognized, the truth of it recognized. So then when you're talking about things, you're not actually talking about things.
Right.
You're using implication to convey meaningfulness that utterly and completely transcends the ways that it's being put, because any way that it's being put is not true, can't be true, because what is true can't be put.
Right.
And so then a person can relate to these words and ideas in a non-definitive way, but just as indications of interfaces of exploration. Ideally. But basically the way it works is you wander around thinking things or things until you develop some subtlety. Bang your head against them often enough, and sooner or later you develop some subtlety, and you go, wait a minute, hold the phone, there's something else going on here.
Yeah, the other day I just wrote this little like the purpose of meditation is to discover what meditation actually is. You know,
Right.
What is this thing you think you're doing?
Right.
It's have you ever heard anybody say that about meditation?
Yeah. Yeah, but I say meditation is, you do meditation to learn you don't need to do meditation.
Right.
And you succeeded in, you're a meditation master when you know you don't have to meditate.
Peter, I have a lot of friends that are into meditation and going on 10-day meditation retreats and longer.
Sure.
And they were like, why don't you try it? And I'm like, I don't think so. You know? And the phrase just came up into my mind, like, and I rely on the miraculous.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
that's obvious.
Yeah. In actuality, the only reason to meditate is the same thing as the reason to eat pizza. If you like it, do it, but don't think you're going to get anything from it.
It gives you
Sorry?
I think it gives an appreciation for solitude that
It can.
those that haven't been experienced before.
Yeah. It can be a context for that. But any being with experience sensitively does the same thing. When you could say that being with experience sensitively is meditation, I won't argue with that.
Well,
But the
I
problem
agree
with
that.
meditation is people think now I'm going to meditate. I now have to meditate, and I need to meditate a certain amount. And this is meditation, and this is not meditation, and I have to sit a certain way, or whatever, you know.
Yeah, but I think that's just a state, you know, you gotta go through first grade and.
Oh,
study it
absolutely.
out, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I don't criticize anyone doing anything, you know, but the trick is to do it sensitively and intelligently enough that you move on. You know, when you're able to, of course.
Yeah. You know, it means that you don't have no causality.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Much fitting time.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you all for joining me.
Tonight.
Thanks a lot.
It was very good.
Without